Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's webinar, New Season of L&D, Training Trends for Fall 2025, presented by Litmos. Thanks to everyone signing on and taking the time to join us today. Feel free to use the chat box to your right to tell us where you're logging in from. And while we wait for more attendees to trickle in, I'll just go over some quick housekeeping notes so that you can get the most out of today's webinar. Before we get this conversation going, here are just a few notes about your webinar console. So you'll notice that there is, as I mentioned, a chat box to your right, to the right of the slide deck area. So throughout the presentation, you can use that chat box to discuss any of the topics that are on deck for today's webinar. And if you scroll down, you'll also see the Q&A box right below the chat box. That's where you can type your questions to myself and the Litmos team who are on the back end, and we can type answers to those questions at any time during the presentation. And we'll also just be saving a few of those towards the end to answer live. Now, it's difficult for us to keep track of questions entered into the chat window, so we really do encourage you all to use that Q&A window for your questions in particular, and the chat window just to discuss the topics. And this session is being recorded, so we will be sending it to you via the email you registered with. Now, today's hosts are Dr. Jill Stefaniak, Litmos' Chief Learning Officer, and Adele Pfister. Adele, what's your title again? I forget.
That's okay. It's right? Product Manager for Customer Education.
Perfect. And actually, that's a perfect segue because I'm going to hand it over to our hosts now to introduce themselves and get this conversation going. So take it away.
Okay. Dr. Jill, do you want to introduce yourself really quick first, and I can go after you?
Sure. So my name is Jill Stefaniak. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Litmos, and I work with our leadership team and our L&D team just to make sure that the design decisions that we're making are grounded in strong instructional design theory. So I get to work with Adele a lot, and really excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, likewise. I don't know what I would do without Dr. Jill some days. She's sometimes my rock as our CLO. And as mentioned before, I'm the product manager for customer education. You might have seen me with professional services earlier on in my career at Litmos, and then moved over to customer education, which is really exciting. And as someone who is consistently and constantly working on how are we going to get the knowledge across to you, our Litmos customers, this agenda here is quite relevant, and especially as we dive into like more of the drive for upskilling and the a little bit of the Great Flattening and also agentic AI. It's been a really interesting year, and so lots of fall trends are popping up, and there's been new ways to do things, which is pretty exciting, but can also be terrifying and confusing. But again, Dr. Jill has always been a steady rock to kind of keep us all grounded here at Litmos. So we're excited about that and grateful to her. And you'll see our agenda here on the slide. So Dr. Jill, I think we're going to start off with, how L&D can drive upskilling in the era of the Great Flattening and the Great Stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we'll play a little game with our group today to see how long can we go before we start talking about AI and L&D.
That's right.
So, but first on our agenda is looking at how can L&D drive upskilling in the era of the Great Flattening and the Great Stay. If we go back, there's been a lot of trends starting several years ago where we had the Great Flattening and organizations were downsizing and really taking a look at their organizational structures. And now we've really seen this shift, particularly, I think, after, post-COVID, where we've started to see more employees are starting to stay put. And from an L&D standpoint, that's a really exciting time for a lot of us, because now might be a little stressful time for some of you, especially if you're like a team of one or a team of two. But now we've got this opportunity where, some of the practices we might have had with onboarding and perhaps customer education, now we have employees staying longer. So what can we do to help support them in their professional development and their career trajectories as they're staying put? Because even if we have employees staying, they still need training. They still need development too. We want to make sure that we're still engaging them in meaningful ways.
Yeah. And one thing I've really noticed too is nobody likes to feel ignored or left behind, right? And sometimes when we have this, constant new hire onboarding all the time, things get really busy. And sometimes you're able to ask those employees, well, why don't you help onboard this individual? Well, that's starting to slow down, right? So how do you start, like Jill was saying, how do you start filling that gap? And one of the things I always think about, Dr. Jill, and we kind of talk about this a lot, because really the ultimate goal of training and L&D, whatever you would like to call it, is the actual transfer of skills, right? And I have always been someone that really, really, one, please make my learning easy to access, right? And then the practice piece. How are you giving me opportunities to really practice any sort of new skill or reskilling that I've been maybe not even asked to do, but want to do, right? I'm staying in this company. I'm committed to this organization. And so what's next? And one of the things that comes up for me is that whether it's reskilling or upskilling is, can the organization provide space and opportunities for me to practice skills?
And I think you've hit the nail on the head with the word opportunity, because, when we think about what does it mean when you have employees staying and you're looking at providing those opportunities for upskilling, we also need to make sure too, depending on what their respective roles are within the organization, they're still carrying out those day-to-day responsibilities associated with their particular position. But then you're also trying to carve out those opportunities for them to be able to, flex a little bit. And how can we support their growth? One of the things that frustrates me a lot, sometimes, as a learner, I think we all go through this, is just having that time to digest what we've learned, like just to actually, like, perhaps you've gone away for training. Anytime we have to go out of town for training, the challenge we have when we get back to work is there's so many emails and so many things we're trying to play catch up on. And so we don't always get to have those times to be able to just sit and digest that information. But if we're doing stuff, even if it's in the flow of work and it's workplace learning, just being able to provide those opportunities, those social learning experiences to talk with our team. I've learned this new skill. I'm interested in trying something new out in the department. What are everyone's thoughts on that? To what extent can we do that? What's realistic? What's feasible? Those are all things that I think are really important for employees to be thinking about. How do you advocate for those things when you're in your team meetings? But then also it's important for the managers to be mindful of that too. In what ways are we supporting our employees as learners and supporting and providing those opportunities to flex?
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of like a core example of when I've gone to a conference or learned a new skill and how did I carve out that time, right? And one of the ways was really, it's just like you said, I did have to have a heart-to-heart with my boss and say, I really would like to pursue this. Can you create the resource and the time? Can you be my sponsor or, someone to support me in this? And although that was a challenging conversation to have, I found it to be really important. And one thing to do too is like maybe keeping track of, if I create this opportunity, and Dr. Jill, maybe you have some examples as well or some stories to tell, but if I create this opportunity to be able to flex these skills and practice within these skills, what are the like thinking like a learning and designing kind of, I'll admit I am a self-proclaimed nerd, right? And so like, what are the outcomes going to be? Sometimes I did have to talk my leadership into that and let them and be really clear, like, here are the outcomes that are going to happen if I'm able to practice this, right? And other times I didn't have to talk folks into it. It kind of just depended on the crowd. But one of the, going back to like LMSs in particular, always remember I was using a very complex, not a Litmos. I was not using Litmos. I was using a pretty complex, really large enterprise LMS, and it was really technical. It was really hard. And so one of the things I had to do, I mean, this wasn't even like, it almost felt like make it or break it, but I had a boss that was really supportive of it. And I would actually create my own demo videos of how to do things, because there was no process documentation. There was no university to jump into. There was nothing. There was no resources available to me at the time. And one of the things I would do is like create these demo videos with voiceovers, right? And I would I would walk through the step-by-step because I knew that I was, and you kind of mentioned micro-learning, I knew that the next time I did this task, I wasn't going to remember all these really heavy tech steps, right? And so I would record myself doing it over and over, like, well, not over again, only one time, as long as I did it right and I was in a test environment. And then I would save that file to my local drive. And every time I needed that skill set, I had the ability to bring it back up and reuse it. But this was a brand new skill set. This was one of the first, this is probably like 10, 15 years ago when I first got introduced to LMSs, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was very complex to me at the time. And so that was one of the, it's just a story that I come back to over and over again of like, I had to figure out a way to upskill and reskill, and I needed those in the flow of work resources that didn't already exist. There was no resources to be had. And then what ended up happening is when I graduated from that organization, so to speak, I was able to give all those files to the next person in line, and that was really nice. And my boss got to take credit for that, and I didn't mind that. You know, he was the one that gave me the bandwidth to do it, right? He said, yeah, go ahead, you can spend your time doing that as long as it helps you create assignment rules correctly. So
I had a similar experience yesterday. I also work as a faculty member, and I had a research meeting with one of my students, and it's a student, she's learning how to do something for the first time and wanted to have that opportunity to try it out herself first, and then I'm going to go in and give her feedback. But it was the tasks that she's going to do. They're tasks that I probably do maybe once a year. So when you're trying to figure out in the software package we were working on, like, where do you click? I was like, I'm going to try it first and I'm going to record it for you. And then you're going to do the rest. But for any instructional designers that are on the call, I am being a very diligent instructional designer. She is getting a very nice full-blown task analysis because I can't help myself. But it kind of just speaks to, Adele, what you were saying with the micro learnings, and anytime we have those opportunities to think about what are some of those skills where we can upskill, where we can hone our craft and whatever our position may be. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, you know, real life, real world solutions where, you know, we're even trying to create that in the moment in the university, right? Where we're, you know, and you helped me with that. That was really one of the things we're currently working on. It's not live yet. It's not launched yet, is really breaking things into more digestible chunks, because in the flow of work is incredibly important, right? Especially when you're working with SaaS platforms. You know, it's interesting because L&D focuses so heavily on the transfer of skills, right? And at the same time, I'm always combating with, but if I have a job aid or a resource available, do I really need to memorize this step that I only use maybe even, 2 to 3 times a year, right? Like compliance settings, I only use that 2 to 3 times a year. I'm not going to use that every month, every day, every week. So the micro learnings and in the flow of work is really important. It does look like we have a couple of questions here. So the first one being, how can an LMS be integrated with talent management, performance reviews, and career progression frameworks? And so this was actually, I have multiple memories coming up right here, especially around performance reviews. But Jill, do you have any examples or stories? And if not, that's okay. I can pitch in on mine as well. But
yeah, I think maybe we can kind of tag team it a bit. I think one of the things is really having it integrated into your whole strategy. So even before we jump into the LMS, I think having those conversations with leadership where, like, I see the LMS is the tool to help drive that strategy and carry things forward. And so what's most important is, it's great when you have the tool, we need to make sure we have everyone on board and we have that shared understanding of what's going to take place and how this is going to help us. And so I think a lot of times it's just breaking down those silos within your organization to be able to have those conversations with HR or with talent management to figure out how are we going to integrate a lot of these different activities. And I think we're at a point in time too, where this is really important for organizations to be having these conversations. I think some are, and I think some probably always have, but with that trend, with more and more employees staying, there's all the more need. That needs continuing to increase and become more prevalent in our field. How can we support those employees that are staying? Where does upskilling come in? Where do we track, and how do we track those upskilling opportunities to be able to interact and work with HR? And how is that information being captured and being looked at and perhaps stored for future positions, for future opportunities, if we're looking at internal mobility?
Yeah. And of course, the LMS admin in me, of course, jumps to like tracking soft skill completions, but also, creating that matrix for your employees, right? Which takes a lot of time and planning, as you probably know, and most of us know. It's not an easy endeavor to create an organizational wide talent matrix for every position in your business. However, when I have done it in the past, I've seen really amazing results from it. There's really clear definitions of what someone would, quote unquote, need to do or be capable of in order to up level or level up, I should say, in whatever track or path they may be in. It's definitely easier with different types of markets and types of organizations, right? Manufacturing is not going to be the same as a SaaS platform type of org, but the ability is there. And I was kind of going back in time with that question, and there's completions, and of course, if you've got a nice library to offer folks around soft skills or any sort of skills they want to learn, and maybe those can be tracked and integrated into the LMS, whether you're hosting that training and soft skill training in the LMS, or perhaps you've got something that's more on the floor and live training, right? Like when I worked for the manufacturing company, there wasn't a lot of e-learning going on aside from safety and HR type stuff, but the how to use a machine, right? There was a lot of virtual reality going on, and there was a lot of on the floor training, and all of that still had to be tracked in the LMS. And we did have a matrix of like, if you wanted to be a machine operator 2 or 3, you had to show success in these skill sets, and all of those skill sets were tracked in the LMS. And so that was one way that we used it. And on top of that, I was kind of giggling when I saw performance reviews, and I loved what you were saying, but it's almost it's intertwined into what you were saying around like the planning and getting everyone on the same page, right? So we know that we want to run performance reviews. We know that these many managers have to actually implement these performance reviews. How do you get all those HR managers on the same page at once, right? And that was really difficult. That was a big challenge for us. And we actually created e-learning around because we were, again, we were not provided many resources on how to use the performance review tool. Unfortunately, it was kind of like, well, you just have to, here's the tool, here's what it can do for you, but you figure it out, right? And you train your managers on how to use it. And so that's exactly what we had to do, is we had to train all of our HR managers how to use that. And we did that in the LMS, and it was really successful. The year before I had come on board, they had, it was a really painful task. They had a lot of obstacles. It was going over on deadlines repeatedly, right? So they were hoping to have everyone's performance review in by a certain date, and it was exceeding that by weeks, if not a month. So that was really rough for the org. And we came in and built this e-learning for it. And once we released that, and then we did a blended learning approach, right? Where we would use the e-learning tool, track completions of the e-learning, and then we would host virtual live sessions for Q&A, but also just a bit of a venting piece, right? Where managers like, I don't know what I'm doing. Please help me. But what we found, at least we thought that was what was going to happen. But what we found is when we had the live sessions after they had been in the e-learning, we got really great feedback. I feel way more confident in this. I feel like I know what I'm doing. I understand what the goals what the goals are. And also I know how to use the actual performance review tool. So that was one way when I saw that question, that's the story to mind.
Yeah. And I think too, with the performance reviews, if we're thinking about where does upskilling come in, and I think again, some managers are better at this, or perhaps they're more intuitive and they just think about this naturally, but having conversations with their employees about where does L&D fit in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for, you had an employee that's perhaps about to get put on a PIP or might need some remedial training. I think sometimes managers might think of training when in those particular situations, but what about if you have your star player or the champion on your team? What skills do they want to, build or improve upon? And then what are some ways we can provide them with some very intentional targeted training? And that's where an LMS can also come in handy as well, in terms of, is it, what's your L&D strategy? I've worked before with companies where they've said, every employee has to go through 20 hours of online e-learning, and they don't even care what you're learning about, just that they can say you've spent 20 hours trying to learn something. Others will be very specific and very skill focused. And so I think it's just kind of going into, what is your organization's strategy for how you're weaving that in? And that kind of goes to, we've got another question here as well, asking, beyond completion rates, what metrics truly demonstrate learning effectiveness and business impact? And we always get a question about this. I think anytime we have conversations on L&D and ROI, which I think is why we're both smiling right now. I'll start it off and give you the old instructional design answer, which is, it all depends. But I do think, if we're looking at what does this mean for overall business impact, L&D needs to be a part of the conversation early on. And so when we start looking at organizational strategic planning, and we're setting up those strategic planning goals, whether it's, a year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, whatever we're trying to do, it's really important to be thinking about, how would you say L&D has successfully contributed to this? So if we're looking at a manufacturing industry, you were just talking about manufacturing, Adele, then this is where we might say, has there been a reduction in errors or faulty products that are just kind of going into a waste pile? So if we start to see that there's been more improvements that way, then that would show impact. If we're looking at things in terms of health and safety, there's been fewer health and safety reports that have had to have been filed. So we know people are adhering to the OSHA requirements. Those are also really important things that we can also be measuring, but it's going to be very organizational specific and kind of going back to whatever those particular goals are. But I think it's thinking about how would you know your organization has achieved those goals that are being, constructed within that strategic plan. And then the L&D unit, or it might just be a team of one, the L&D individual, can be having conversations with management about how can L&D support the organization achieving those goals.
Absolutely. And, I know we've been talking about manufacturing a lot, and I triggered that. Those were great examples. And, it's similar, although different, even, if you're working for SaaS as well, is, looking at, partnering with those really higher level department heads, right? You're talking about support and customer success, and sales, and where are their gaps, right? And identifying where their gaps are. Is the support team really struggling and closing out successful tickets? And when I say successful, that means the customer feels like we have really solved their problem, right? And if you're and you start digging it, let's say you start digging into that and you start looking at the type of tickets that are not going so well, right? And maybe there's a trend there where, time after time, a support technician or engineer is unable to answer something about a very complex or technical part of the platform. And so that's where L&D can really come in and say, well, maybe we need some upskilling and training around this part of the platform. And sometimes it's not always, and Dr. Jill, I'd love to hear your feedback on this, is sometimes it's not always training, right? It's, again, going back to that, I just need this in the flow of work. This really technical ticket, yes, there are many of them, but they only come up 2 to 3 times a month. So this isn't something I'm doing all the time. It's this kind of random one-off thing in the platform that's very challenging and technical. So really what I need to be able to have easy access and a way to find the information I need right in that moment, right? So that I can answer the customer's question and maybe even just copy and paste the technical process over to them in their support ticket. And then starting to watch those numbers either drop or not. I mean, if you're not seeing a drop in the number of successful tickets being responded to or being reported on, then maybe it's time to dig a little deeper and see what else is going on. But there's been many times working in SaaS companies or even vendor-based companies where, there's a process, an obstacle, and a challenge that keeps reoccurring over and over again. And it's either taking up way too much time or it's creating errors, like you mentioned before, right? Those errors keep popping up, which either flags something in a QA system, pushes all that work back to the representative, and they have to start from scratch again, which again causes more time and labor, costs us money, also does not make the customer very happy. And there's been multiple times where we've rolled out both job aids and e-learning around what to do in these situations. And we always try to, I cannot stress this enough, try to get the before numbers, right? That's really important. And then the after numbers for 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, a year, and then see how that's going. And never be afraid to continuously improve upon your efforts as you start to pull more data.
Yeah. But you've got the wheels spinning for me too. I was just thinking, anytime, regardless of what type of design project we're working on, we should always be asking ourselves 3 questions. Am I contributing to efficiency, effectiveness, and ease of learning? And there are times where, as you said, if it's something that only occurs like here and there, and you're trying to figure out where you're going to allocate your resources, this is where perhaps training is not necessarily the optimal solution or the most cost effective. And so when we start thinking about, especially with efficiency and effectiveness, and especially in today, as we're looking at organizations being really mindful with their budgets, I've yet to meet an organization where they said we have too many learning designers on our team. Usually it's the opposite, right? We're trying to argue for more. But I think that's really important. So especially when you have to start prioritizing which projects are we going to be focusing on in the next quarter or over the course of the next fiscal year, those are really important conversations to have. And that's where you can kind of start looking at what is the frequency that this need is occurring within the organization. Can it be fixed with that quick job aid? Or is it something where if we really need to see an ongoing and permanent change in somebody's behavior or being able to carry out a task, then that's when training is the optimal solution.
That's right. Training and practice. Yes. And, speaking of, you're talking about results and prioritization and making decision-making. And I'm wondering, we're about 27 minutes in, and are we ready to talk about AI, Dr. Jill?
Yeah, we can. We were good for a while. So.
I know. And, it's like this new frontier, right? And Dr. Jill has been so amazing in really kind of comforting everyone. There's been, I feel like for L&D especially, there's been a lot of fear around, and there's also been kind of these rumors, right? Where AI is going to take my job and AI is going to start building all this content. And, I have yet to fall into that fear. And I think one of the reasons is I've just really been passionate about diving right into AI and figuring out how it can help me get through my workload. But one of the ways it has really helped is through pulling prioritization data. I do my own research. I'll pull my own data. I'll come out with my own outcomes around that data as I'm analyzing and looking at it. And then I run it through the AI tool, and it'll 99% of the time it validates exactly what I'm thinking, right? But it also, I'll wait to talk about this a bit, but it also does some other things that are really nice, but we'll talk about in a minute. I think, do we feel like this is a good time for the first poll that we had?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So we've got a poll for you. All right. Thank you. So how has AI impacted your L&D strategy? And we've got a few options for you there. We'll give you some time. I always feel like we need Jeopardy music during this moment. All right, we've got some answers coming in. So our options today are identifying trends and gaps in L&D strategy, reducing time spent on administrative tasks, my favorite, facilitates more technical or complex problem solving, another favorite, speeds up content development, iteration, and optimization. It's a good one. Optimizing data analysis from LMS and L&D reporting.
And I think one of the things that we see here, and I'm not overly surprised by the results. Even when we think about with 42% of folks that are joining us today putting in, that they're utilizing it to, speed up content development, but it's not replacing it. And that's where I think that's where we're still safe as designers. Instructional design, learning design, it is such a human-centered discipline. And even, if you look at, and I won't bore anyone with it today, but you can look at other design disciplines and research that's done. So much is done really thinking about who's that end user. And in our cases as L&D professionals, who's the learner, and really being able to empathize and put ourselves in their shoes and figure out how are they going to be using the content that's being presented to them. How are they digesting it? How are they hopefully being able to transfer it into their places of employment? And that's where I think that there is a lot of opportunity to be able to speed up, to be more efficient, as we said, am I contributing to effectiveness, efficiency, and ease of learning? But again, it still warrants that critical eye to say, how is this contributing to our organizational goals? How is this contributing to, perhaps there's those special projects where you're trying to be very sensitive to the needs of a particular unit within your organization when you're developing training. So we certainly can't, approach it blindly and just with blind trust that anything that's going to be produced is good. But I definitely see there's opportunities of how it's going to be changing and helping us get quicker at certain tasks and being able to spend more time on some of those other ones that are more human-centered in by nature.
Yeah. And to just, since this is the biggest one, 41%, so quite a bit more participation in this one topic, right? Speeds up content development, iteration, and optimization. And so since I can remember, I've always been in charge of creating content. And it used to be, as you know, Dr. Jill, right? Like creating content is a bear. It's a bear.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you make the decision to create content, there should always be a heavy priority and a very good reason that you have decided and committed to create content. That was one of, I feel like I was often not always the popular one in some orgs, right? Because people really, let's build a training around this and we can build a training around that. And I was usually the one that kind of grounded people and said, well, is that really your biggest priority? Is that your biggest pain point? Is transfer of skills and memorization and a true application of skills really what we need here? Again, or is it a job aid? Is it an internal communication? Because content is such a bear to create. And I think most people can relate to that. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of prep work. It takes a lot of analysis. You've got to meet with SMEs. You've got to please stakeholders, right? And so this has also been one of my favorite ways of using AI. And I will say that there is no way we could do it without humans. There's no way I could let AI just build my content. I have to give the AI tool the information it needs, the objectives. I have to give it analysis data before I could even trust that it could actually pump out content. But I will share a few things on, what my team and I have really been using it for lately. And we've really found good results. And so what we do have is, we have a really strong version control team, which is amazing. I know that not everyone has that. I've never had it until now. And I was always that one person training team. It was just me and the organization, right? And so A few of the things that we have found great success with is creating stronger learning objectives sometimes, right? Like kind of QAing learning objectives, especially for our more junior instructional designers or even our digital designers. And then also polishing up or making storyboards more concise, and also giving it a full storyboard and then saying, I want you to break this up into micro learning for me now, right? This was a full 30-minute course. I understand that this needs to be broken up and compartmentalized. How would you do that? And we found a lot of success there. And then also, of course, like module generation can be really cool as long as you have enough data for the tool, right? The tool is only as good as the data you give it. And I hope that's a good reminder for everyone on the call that I don't think AI could ever really replace us because it's only as good as the data you feed it. So
yeah, well, and it's so context specific. And
yes,
I see we've got a comment in the chat about learning styles. And I think if anyone's ever read my stuff, you know how I feel about learning styles. I definitely think they're a myth. But if we look at the context specific, how instruction is context specific, this is where AI still can't do all of that. And that's where it's really important, where it can generate those things. And as you were saying, Adele, then you and your team can jump in and go, where do we weave in those contextual factors? I think, our learners don't care. Our learners do not care if AI is generating their content. What they care about is the content valid? Do they see the utility and value in the content that's being presented? And some of the challenges that we face as learning designers is it can be equally stressful, right? Regardless of what spectrum you're on. You've got the spectrum where you're designing something very general because it's going to go out to hundreds or thousands of learners and they're all coming with these different experiences. So you don't want to get too specific to the point where it's not relevant for anyone. But then you also have those opportunities where you do want to be able to get more into the weeds and provide more details and really address those unique nuances related to those situations. And that's where AI tends to fall short. And this is where we really need to be looking in on, what is the purpose of the training to begin with? What is, Adele, you said, you asked the question, why are we developing content? What do we want our learners to be able to do with it? And I think that gets us starting to think about that assessment and transfer. And so it's just really interesting. It's an interesting time for all of us. I know there's a lot of organizations rushing and becoming overly reliant on AI to just design all kinds of training. And I think there tends to be more of a push or a rush for quantity over quality. And I think we're going to start hearing from our learners in this next little while, talking about where's the quality and wanting that quality, especially as they're starting to focus in on, I'm going to kind of tie it back to our previous topic. As we're thinking about upskilling, they're going to say, I don't need something as general as I'm continuing to, increase my proficiency with a particular topic.
Yeah. And that reminds me of our team has been using our AI assistant, our enterprise level AI assistant as a way to kind of also just spark ideas, right? Like, let's say you've hit a wall, that you need skills to transfer, which means you probably do need an assessment. You need some sort of way to assess skills. You need ways to promote and give opportunities for practice. That's also a way we've kind of been using it. Like, I've got this scenario. Here are the learning objectives. Here's the training that I'm presenting to them. What are some good ideas for, and I might be even careful, like with assessment, you still have to QA everything that comes out of this assistant, right? And for me, that's how I really look at it. It is an assistant. It is not the leader. It is not the decision maker when it comes to creating content. However, it can help me with making decisions. It can assist me in making decisions. What I would love one day, and if we could go back to, let me pull up the poll here for myself. Can we pull up the poll results one more time? Because I'd also love to talk about reporting. I saw that optimizing data analysis from LMS and L&D reporting was possibly, the lowest. And it's, I'm just here to maybe even evangelize a little bit. This is my number one use of AI. It's actually not creating content. I do a lot of reducing time spent on not admin tasks yet. I would love to do that eventually from our admins here at Litmos. but optimizing. So my job is, a big part of my job is like creating, a strategy and a roadmap for our customer education program. And so I'm pulling completion data. I'm also pulling, someone was asking, what are other metrics besides completion data? So I have come far from like being an internal trainer, which was usually the name of my game for a very long time. And now I'm an external trainer, right? My job is to try to train you guys as best as I can as customers, which is a bit different. So one of my criteria also when I'm pulling data is engagement data, which is a little bit different. I mean, completion data falls into that, but it's how many times did someone log in? Where did they go while they were logged in? How long were they there? How long were they in this module in particular? Did they complete that module, or did they just stop on like the second page, right, of content? And so, and my thought is, because for us in customer education, it's not always about, did they complete the course? I want to know if I helped you get through what you needed. That's my biggest thing. I want to know, well, did I help them answer their question, right? Because I know they're probably trying to find an answer to a platform question. And so one of my biggest uses of right now of our enterprise level Copilot, we have Copilot at an enterprise level at the moment, is to put my reporting data into Copilot. Like I said, I'll analyze it first and come up with some of my own outcomes after 10 or so years of working and training and looking at and knowing the engagement metrics I want to see and what I'm hoping for. I'll come up with my own outcomes, but then I put it into the AI assistant and see what it says. And sometimes there's small data points that I wouldn't even have thought of, or it can also provide solid suggestions. So far, it's been quite solid around making suggestions for alternative data points to look at, number one, but also it creates these beautiful images and pivot. Like, I don't want to spend a ton of time creating pivot tables. I think most trainers in the world can say, I do not want to spend all my time in Excel. I'm a trainer. I'm a creative. I want to build training and help people. Like, that's usually when I'm hanging out with other trainers, that's kind of our MO, right? And so I don't want to spend a bunch of time creating pivot tables. The AI assistant does an amazing job of doing just that within minutes from the data that I pull from it. And it has been a complete game changer for me when it comes to, so I just heavily encourage people to really think outside the box with your reporting and maybe give AI a little bit of a chance. Now, you need to stay safe. You need to stay within your organization's code of conduct, right? That's also something to think about. I think that's one of the things that was mentioned in the blog is like, it's great, but it also comes with certain risks. That might be one of them. Make sure your organization is okay with you doing this, or push for that enterprise level license. So, yeah. Looks like we're at the thank you slide.
This went by fast, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah, 45 minutes flew by. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat about these topics. And thanks to everybody who sent those amazing questions over. It was a great discussion.
I'm laughing at Phil's last comment. He said it's an unpaid intern.
I love that. I love that.
In regard to AI. Yes, that's right, Phil.
We also got some love for your mention of small teams of
I saw that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's real. It's common.
Yeah. And I would encourage everybody to go over to the Litmos website, to our resources and to our blog, because we do unpack a lot more about AI and L&D, a lot more about, I saw someone mention the 70-20-10 model. We even have a resource on that. So there's a lot on the Litmos page that can sort of take a deeper dive into those topics. But any closing thoughts, you two?
Stay curious, stay within your code of conduct, and but yeah, stay curious and really try to think outside the box. It doesn't just have to be about content creation and using I would love one day, like my fantasy is that one day there will be these agentic AI tools that can pull data from the LMS and then make safe decisions for you, or like, say you've got onboarding data and the tool within the LMS is able to say, oh, this person is this job role. I'm going to assign them this. And also, like, we have that with assignment rules, but I envision like it just creeping up to the next level when it comes to actual making administrative decision making so that you don't have to worry about it. That would be a fantasy. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. Stay curious.
I like that. Well, thank you both again. And just a reminder to everybody who's signed in that you'll be getting a recording of this session to the email that you signed up with. And you should be expecting that by end of day. So thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thanks so much.
morning, afternoon, evening, and night.